The master knew that Mr. Liao was still unable to accomplish the state of no thought, but he could practice reciting the Junti mantra continuously without keeping track of the number of recitations and without interruptions. The state of no thought is essential. It is to not have any wandering thoughts, discriminatory thoughts, or attachments. Even though Mr. Liao had not given rise to any wandering thoughts for the 3 days while he had been meditating with the Master, he had not yet reached the state of no thought. He had just used confidence, not concentration, to suppress his afflictions. He believed that all was destined. He believed in cause and effect. Therefore, the Master taught him a way to move on to the next level, to cultivate concentration. To recite the Junti mantra is to cultivate concentration. In ridding ourselves of wandering thoughts and attachments, our true nature will thus be uncovered. The Buddha spoke many times of the original nature as it is. It is the same thing as one mind undisturbed in the Pure Land school. This is the goal of our practice and the true and perfect achievement. It is to reach the achievement of to not recite when reciting and to recite when not reciting. This is often explained as not being attached to the act of reciting or chanting. Thus, to not chant when chanting and to chant when not chanting. We do so whether we are chanting a Buddha's name or reciting the sutra. Therefore, when we do recite the Infinite Life Sutra, we can first achieve constant mindfulness of Buddha Amitabha, and then one mind undisturbed. It is evident that even though the methods may differ, the principles and the goal are the same. When we reach the state of no thought, when the reciting becomes second nature, it will naturally become effective. Basically, there are 3 levels of achievement. The upper level is one mind undisturbed in enlightenment. The middle level is one mind undisturbed in mindfulness. And the lower level is constant mindfulness of Buddha Amitabha, which is where our cultivation begins. Therefore, we cannot be proud when our achievement reaches a certain level. For if we do so, then we will not be able to advance further. Reaching the upper level of constant mindfulness of Buddha Amitabha. We will have the ability to transcend this world at will, to leave whenever we wish. Whenever we want to go, Buddha Amitabha will come to escort us to the Western Pure Land. Although we have reached this level of achievement and are able to pass away at ease, it is best to stay longer in this world. Why? The Infinite Life Sutra tells us that to practice in our world of suffering for one day is like practicing in the Pure Land for 100 years. We can stay in this world to train our endurance. The second and even more important reason to stay is to encourage more people to go to the Western Pure Land. It is remarkable that we ourselves are able to go. But it would be even better if we could help others to go there as well. Thus, we can concentrate on helping, educating, and encouraging others. When we ourselves cultivate and encourage others to cultivate as well, our merit is perfect. In so doing, we are able to pay back the great kindness the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have shown us. For the seeking to be effective, there must be a gain. From the text. My name used to be Shui Hai, which means broad learning. But after receiving these teachings from Master Yuangu, I changed it to Liao Fan, which means transcending the ordinary. End quote. In the past, people had 3 sets of names in China: their formal name, their courtesy name, and their assumed name. Their parents gave them their first one. This name could not be changed, for to do so would be unfilial. The names that parents gave expressed their aspirations for us. If these were changed, it would be tantamount to ignoring this aspiration, truly an unfilial act. Their assumed name was sometimes used when one had a certain social status or prestige in society. When people reached a certain age and became an adult, others no longer called him or her by the name that had been given by their parents. Upon reaching age 20, males underwent a ceremony to be initiated into adulthood. Before this ceremony, everyone could address him by his formal name. Afterwards, it was disrespectful for others to still address him by this formal name that had been given to him by his parents. Then how did others address him? During the ceremony, people of the same generation or older, siblings, schoolmates, and friends, would give the courtesy name. For the rest of his life, he was addressed by this name, no longer by his formal name. If in the future he were to become a government official or emperor, people would address him by this courtesy name. The same applied to females, although their age for reaching adulthood was 16 years. If a person was addressed by his formal name, then most likely he had committed a crime, been sentenced, and punished for that crime. We need to be clear on this general knowledge of how people were addressed. If people wanted to be even more respectful, they would address a person by an assumed name or their birthplace. To address a person as such indicated that he was a respected, important person from a particular place. To address a person by the birthplace was the most respected form of address. It is the same in Buddhism. To show the utmost respect, a monk or nun is addressed by the name of his or her way place or location. Master Jutsu was addressed as the great master of Tiantai because he lived on Tiantai Mountain. Another example is Master Huiji, who was addressed as Su'un because he was from Su'un Temple. Liao Fan and Shui Hai were Mr. Liao Fan's assumed names, a very respectful way of addressing him. Only the parents and teacher used a person's formal name after that person reached adulthood. Even grandparents and uncles still addressed a person by their courtesy name. Thus, we see that society accorded the same gratitude and respect to teachers as it did to parents. In Buddhism, monks and nuns have what are known as internal and external names. Their internal one is the Buddhist name. Their external name is the courtesy name. From the text. It signified my understanding of the fact that we could create our destiny, and that I did not wish to be like ordinary people who were controlled by their destiny. From then on, I began to be very cautious and careful in whatever I thought or did. Soon, I felt quite different from before. In the past, I was careless and lived my days in distraction and had no self-discipline at all. Now, I found myself being naturally cautious and conscientious. End quote. This segment talks of Mr. Liao Fan's determination and cultivation in correcting his errors and making a new start. First, he changed his assumed name to Liao Fan from Shui Hai. Liao means to clearly understand. Fan means an ordinary person. At that moment, he understood everything in regards to everyday matters. He was awakened. He truly knew that only we could change and create destiny. He understood the principles and the methods, and knew that from then on, he did not have to just follow the path of destiny, because it was not fixed. After his resolution to reform, his feeling in daily living changed. From that point on, until the end of his life, he was constantly aware of his thoughts and behavior, was always on the alert, was no longer deluded. In the past, he had been unrestrained, doing things as he pleased, drifting aimlessly through each day. How did he live his life? He did not know. He had no direction. He had no goal. If we live this way, then we will be bound by fate, unable to create our own future. After reforming, he found himself being naturally cautious and careful in thought, speech, and behavior. In other words, after turning over a new leaf, his beliefs differed. His viewpoints regarding life and the universe changed dramatically. Before, he thought everything was bound by fate. What was there to change? But now he knew that we can change destiny. Thus, he was more positive, more determined, more optimistic. From the text, I maintained this attitude even when alone, for I know that there are spirits and heavenly beings everywhere who know my every action and thought. I am cautious to not offend them with my conduct. Even when I encounter people who dislike or slander me, I could take their insults with a patient and peaceful mind, and do not feel compelled to quarrel with them. End quote. The reason why ordinary people cannot reform is because they do not understand this. Those who are more familiar with the Infinite Life Sutra will understand such situations and be even more careful with their thoughts, speech, and behavior. Even more careful than Mr. Liao Fan was. This is because the population of the Pure Land is beyond calculation. Even if we used every single computer in this world, we could not calculate the number of beings who live there. And yet, every one of them possess the same abilities as Buddha Amitabha. Each of them has the heavenly eye to see all, heavenly ears to hear all, the ability to know every thought of every being throughout the universe in the past, present, and future. So Buddha Amitabha, great compassion Bodhisattva, great strength Bodhisattva, and all the beings in the Western Pure Land know our every thought, know our every wrongdoing. This talks of when we are alone, when no one else can see us. We still need to restrain ourselves and not give rise to any single improper thought. In so doing, we will truly achieve self-discipline and control. As Pure Land practitioners, we want to seek birth into the Pure Land, want to achieve our virtuous nature. If we continue to deceive ourselves, we will be unable to achieve. Confucius said, "The decent person is wary of being alone." Even if we live alone, we can still discipline ourselves by not indulging ourselves without restrictions. In this way, we are truly cultivating. Ordinary people constantly indulge themselves without any real discipline. When in public, they may appear cautious and self-restrained, but when alone, they once again indulge themselves. For example, why is it that in ancient way places, many practitioners slept in one room and were not allowed to sleep in a single room? Because if there was only one person sleeping in a room, he or she would be unable to achieve in cultivation. To sleep in a room with others is to rely on the group. When there are over 10 people sleeping in a room, they will behave well even when sleeping. The purpose of this was to force people to discipline themselves. Today's society is different from those in the past, in that no one is willing to restrain himself or herself, but are self-indulgent, intent on enjoying comfort. Living with a large group, everyone needs to work together. There are some single rooms at way places, but they are especially for cultivators of advanced years. Also, those who hold high positions and who have many responsibilities, like abbots or the leading monk, also need to have a room of their own for the convenience of handling matters at all hours without disturbing others. Therefore, true practitioners practice living together harmoniously, one of the 6 principles of harmony. It is inappropriate for an individual to have a single room. if a person thinks it is uncomfortable to have 2 or 3 people living in a room, it then becomes very easy to think, I do not wish to live with this person or that particular person. Whoever thinks in this way will be unable to achieve the state of constant mindfulness of Buddha Amitabha. Why? They have discriminatory and impure minds. It is the mind that still has dislikes and evasions. How would that person possibly achieve? Then where and how do we cultivate? Wherever it is that we dislike the most. Wherever exists the most discriminatory environment to cultivate our purity, our non-discriminatory mind. This is cultivation. It is wrong, it is a fault for us not to be willing to live with or get along with someone. Mr. Liao had discovered his faults, mended his ways, and sincerely corrected his errors. Now, when we have faults, not only do we not correct them, but also we continuously nurture them. How then can we hope to achieve in our cultivation? Therefore, within a Sangha, a starting point for our cultivation is the 6 principles of harmony, which are the basic guideline to follow when living together in a large group. For individuals, anyone can abide by the fundamental precepts and the 10 good conducts. In the past, way places used the Sami precepts and guidelines for dignified behavior as the standard, the 10 precepts, and the 24 kinds of dignified manners. Today, we do not need to be that severe. It will suffice for us to follow the 5 precepts and the 10 good conducts. This can be the standard for both lay people and monks and nuns. However, the standard cannot be lower than this. To live in a group, it is necessary to abide by the 6 principles of harmony, to correct our faults and bad habits, and to learn to neither dislike nor detest others. Mr. Liao found out that even now, when encountering those who disliked or slandered him, he no longer minded. Rather, he found that he could patiently bear their insults with a peaceful mind and no longer felt compelled to quarrel with them. It was evident that his mind was calm and serene, unlike before when he was flighty and impatient, unable to endure the slightest inconvenience, the slightest wrong. Here we can see his improvement from cultivation. Therefore, a practitioner, a true Buddhist, needs to learn how to get along with everybody, to get along with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, even demons and ghosts, to have found our inner peace and to hold on to it, regardless of the current environment or circumstances. When the sixth patriarch of Zen, Master Huineng, was 24 years old, he found himself in the presence of, and thus attendant to, a group of hunters. He witnessed their hunting, killing, and committing many bad deeds daily. He saw and heard with his own ears and eyes. Also, he cooked their meat for them and took care of them. At that time, the hunters were his masters. He was their servant. He did this not just for a short time, but for 15 years. Could we have endured doing this? He not only endured, but in that environment he still lived at ease. He learned how to not give rise to any wandering thoughts, discriminatory thoughts, and attachments. For him, these were 15 years of true cultivation. He reached enlightenment when he was in Huangmei in the southern part of China. Having attained enlightenment, he started to correct his bad habits. Whether under favorable or unfavorable circumstances, he cultivated his mind of purity, equality, great compassion, and kindness. There is nothing more important than the cultivation of these three qualities. Today, when we interact with people and matters, are we cultivating with our mind of purity under favorable or unfavorable circumstances? If we are not cultivating our purity of mind, then we are not truly cultivating, and we will not attain any benefits. If so, we are not properly practicing Buddhism. Thus, we are studying it as an academic pursuit. Even if we spent every day reading the sutras and were extremely articulate in explaining them, we would just be increasing our afflictions. In this way, we will be in the three bad realms. This is obviously and absolutely wrong. True practitioners do not attach to the words, do not attach to what has been said. Rather, they use their intuition. They seek purity of mind, the non-discriminatory mind, the true mind, which is in our original self-nature. They seek perfect, complete enlightenment. As Pure Land practitioners, this is our goal. to attain constant mindfulness of Buddha Amitabha. Constant mindfulness is the mind of purity and equality. Non-discrimination is one entirety. Purity is one entirety. There is no barrier within the true mind. In other words, if we still have discriminatory thoughts and attachments, then we are unable to achieve constant mindfulness. Departing from these discriminatory thoughts and attachments, we will be able to achieve constant mindfulness, to be truly cultivating. Although this is not a very high level of achievement, attaining it shows that Mr. Liao Fan was proceeding correctly, and he had received a good response. From the text. The year after I met Master Yuangu, I took the preliminary imperial exam, in which Mr. Kong had predicted that I would come in third place. Amazingly, I came in first. Mr. Kong's predictions were beginning to lose their accuracy. He had not predicted I would pass the imperial exam at all, but that autumn I did. End quote. Mr. Liao Fan was destined to place third in the exam, but by cultivating kind deeds and accumulating merits and virtue, he was able to improve his placement from third to first. As Mr. Kong's predictions began to lose their accuracy, Mr. Liao Fan saw firsthand that he was able to change destiny, saw firsthand that there were variables, not just constants. Next, he made the wish to pass an even higher level of examination, and again his wish came true. To gain something we were not destined to have is to truly have sought and gained. From the text. Although I had corrected many of my faults, I found that I could not wholeheartedly do the things I ought to. Even if I did them, it was forced and unnatural. I reflected within and found that I still had many shortcomings, such as seeing an opportunity to practice kindness and not being eager enough to do it, or having doubts when helping others in need. Sometimes I forced myself to act kindly, but my speech was still untamed and offensive. I found I could contain myself when sober, but after a few drinks, I would lose self-discipline and act without restraint. Although I often practiced kind deeds and accumulated merits, my faults and offenses were so numerous, they seemed to outnumber my good deeds. A lot of my time was spent vainly and without value. End quote. We would do well to pay attention to these several points. Mr. Liao found that though he had corrected many faults, he was still unable to do things as enthusiastically as he ought to. As for us, we should not expect any reward when we help others, for it is our responsibility to do so. Confucius and others taught us the 5 human relationships and 10 moral responsibilities. The 5 human relationships are founded on traditional moral principles. They include those between husband and wife, parent and child, siblings, friends, political leaders, and the public. To practice what we ought to practice is a virtue of our nature. It is naturally within our responsibilities as parents to be protective, to care for, and guide our children. It is naturally within our responsibility as children to be filial, to honor, and to respect our parents. Whether as siblings or friends, we should be respectful towards each other. Friends should be trustworthy, honest, and reliable towards one another. All these are within our responsibility. We are naturally obligated to be such. All of us should be mutually caring, respectful towards one another, helpful towards one another. Mr. Liao understood this, although he does not yet practice it perfectly and purely. For him and we, these are still intermingled with personal advantages and disadvantages. If I were to help this person, how would it benefit me? If we have these considerations, then our thoughts and actions are not pure, and we will be unable to wholeheartedly put our efforts into helping others. From this, we know that although we do kind deeds, we still have not yet done enough. Mr. Liao carefully reflected and found that he still had many shortcomings, such as seeing an opportunity to practice kindness and not being eager enough to do it. Confucius taught of the virtue of assisting others in achieving kindness. He taught that beauty is a virtue. When we encounter others doing good deeds, we would do well to help them accomplish their goal. Why? A good deed can benefit the whole town, the whole society. For example, when a road needs to be fixed and a person volunteers to repair it, when we come upon an occurrence like this, we need to wholeheartedly put our efforts into assisting that person to accomplish this goal and to benefit the people. Any matter similar to this benefits people, benefits society, and deserves assistance from all of us. Another example is here in Singapore, where the Singapore Buddhist Lodge and the Amitabha Buddhist Society have visited the Muslims, Hindus, and Catholics During these visits, we have had the good fortune to be able to assist them in their admirable work in such areas as caring for the aged, for the hearing impaired, and in providing free medical care. Some people have questioned why Buddhists are helping religious groups. We do so because it benefits people, benefits society, and needs assistance to be able to do so. This is what we learned from Liao Fan's 4 lessons. When we practice acts of kindness, we do not discriminate. We do not say, we will help these people, but we will not help those people. We need to practice the heart of helping, and to do so without expectation of reward. It is to wholeheartedly use our compassion, our wisdom. Mr. Liao Fan was able to go along in helping others, but could not do so wholeheartedly. He was only a little bit willing. He still had doubts when helping others in need. If others are in trouble, we need to help. But many of us first question whether we should or should not. In today's society, we frequently encounter people asking for help. Some of these people are frauds asking for money. After receiving it, they go out and spend it on overindulging themselves in food, drinks, and gambling. If so, then our kind deeds become transgressions. Thus it is difficult indeed to do kind deeds, for it requires both compassion and wisdom. Compassion is the authentic driving force behind our helping others. Wisdom will help us to examine and judge whether we should or should not help. If the person does indeed need our help, then we do everything we can to assist them. On the other hand, if they try to cheat and swindle us, and we know what they are doing, we need to guide them. If they are not really old or ill, but are healthy and strong, then we can encourage and guide them, to encourage them to engage in a decent and proper job, not to be making a living using devious means. Sometimes Mr. Liao Fan forced himself to act kindly, but his speech was still uncivilized and offensive. Therefore, correcting errors is to make a fresh start in something it is not readily accomplished. It requires time and continuous reformation. In the beginning stages, difficulties are unavoidable. To behave kindly and courteously in manner while being careless and thoughtless in speech is a bad habit. Since ancient times, speech has been considered the source of both fortune and misfortune. So we need to be constantly aware in our speech. Of Confucius' 4 studies, the first one is that of virtuous conduct, which is basic to being an honest person. Today, we would call this moral education. However, this kind of education no longer exists today, as people today are less concerned about it. The second academic discipline is speech. Confucius was emphatic on the training of speech, that we should speak properly with respect and not harm others with our inconsiderate words. We often carelessly harm others with our speech. When this happens, they take offense and bear grudges. In the future, they will seek revenge. Thus, resentment and misunderstandings arises from this, creating many problems for us. The speaker had no such intention. The listener interpreted it to be so. We need to be discreet, reserved, and reticent in our speech. There really is no need to talk a lot. In talking less, we will commit fewer mistakes. For our achievement, while helping others to achieve as well, especially for practitioners cultivating purity of mind, one phrase of Amitabha will suffice. In this way, when we are subjected to listening to gossip, we do not respond with anything other than Amitabha. When they continue to gossip, we repeat Amitabha. We continue to repeat Amitabha several times. When they are finished, we will not have paid any attention to what they said. We will only have chanted and have forgotten whatever they were talking about. This will be good, for it is best not to say much. Mr. Liao had this bad habit of talking too much. He also found that he would be on his best behavior when sober, but after a few drinks, he would lose self-discipline and act without restraint. This restriction on intoxicants is one of the 5 major precepts in Buddhism. We need to understand exactly why the Buddha prohibited alcohol. When intoxicated, we can act foolishly and thus recklessly. If we can drink a moderate amount of alcohol and not become intoxicated, then there is an exception to this precept. The precept is very clear on this. We are not even supposed to take 1 drop of alcohol. There was the fear that we would be unable to control ourselves, which would lead to creating other problems, breaking other fundamental precepts. In the past, when Venerable Master Jing Kong was studying in Taichung, his late teacher, Mr. Bingnan Li, lectured on the Book of Rites. There was a commentary on the Book of Rites written by Mr. Kong Chung Jung, a learned scholar who combined profundity with virtue during the East Han Dynasty, almost 2,000 years ago. He was a student of Rong Ma, who in his own time was also an exceptional scholar. However, being narrow-minded, he was extremely displeased if any of his students' achievements surpassed his. Mr. Zheng's achievement did precisely this. Rong Ma could not only not resign himself to this, but he hired someone to kill Mr. Zheng. When Mr. Zheng was taking leave from his teacher, the latter took his students to a pavilion 10 kilometers out of town to see Mr. Zheng off. He implemented his ill-intentioned plan and began encouraging everyone to start drinking toasts to the departing student. Eventually, Mr. Zheng drank 300 toasts. Rong Ma had hoped to get Mr. Zheng drunk, which would have made it much easier for the killer to succeed with his plan. He had no idea that alcohol had no effect on his student. Mr. Zheng maintained his demeanor of courtesy and propriety throughout the evening. Mr. Li said that if everyone were able to drink this much without being affected, then Buddha Shakyamuni would never have needed to establish this precept. We need to understand why Buddha Shakyamuni set up this as well as other precepts. When Buddhists are cooking, it is okay to use cooking wine because we will not become intoxicated. It is therefore permissible to use it for flavoring. As for the elderly, alcohol can improve circulation. So it is permissible for them to drink a glass at meal times. These are exceptions to the rule. They are not breaking the precepts. We have learned of Mr. Liao Fan's sincerity in honoring his teacher and revering his teachings. He did not casually say that he would do something and then gradually forget all about it. Instead, he had the rare ability to immediately understand and believe everything that Master Yungu taught him. We see the depth of this understanding and belief as Mr. Liao Fan began to regret each and every one of his faults in front of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In essence, he asked them to be his witness. When we are truly intelligent and wise, we will let others know of our faults. Then when we are corrected, our karmic obstacles will be reduced. The Master taught him to chant a mantra to help him concentrate his mind, eradicate his wandering thoughts, and thus attain purity of mind. To attain this goal of purity of mind remains the same whether we are chanting mantras, a Buddha's name, or reciting sutras. All emphasize cultivation. What is important is that we choose the method that is most appropriate for us. If we cultivate sincerely and diligently, then we will be able to end our erroneous ways, practice kind deeds, and cultivate purity of mind. In due time, whatever we seek will be attained. In seeking something from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or the beings of heaven and earth. We need to do so without having any thoughts or considerations for our seeking to be effective. To achieve this, our mind needs to be truly pure, without any wandering thoughts. This is the mind of sincerity, purity, and respect. Only when we appeal to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas using this mind will we attain what we seek. Unfortunately, most people wish for a happy and fulfilling life, not realizing that this is not necessarily synonymous with wealth, fame, and prestige. Therefore, we need to understand that if we wish to create our destiny, we need to be able to accord with sentient beings and to be joyful over the good deeds of others. Only in this way will our lives be happy and fulfilling, and then we can help others to attain these as well. Regardless of favorable or unfavorable conditions, we will be completely at ease. We will have good fortune and attain the great liberation. True happiness is not achievable without great knowledge and our efforts and our practice. Actual learning and true practice is true knowledge. Reaching achievement is returning to our original state. It is revealing our self-nature, which is not the state of an ordinary being. This is true happiness. It is to be filled with the Dharma joy, to truly abandon suffering for happiness. It is what awakened people seek. Only when we become awakened will we be able to settle our mind. And only then will we be able to create our destiny. Amitofo. Thank you.